Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the second video for Sociology 200. I'm back. I'm excuse me. Feeling a little better. Still sick, and I'm going to try and be a little more coherent this time. We'll see if I make it or not. And I'm going to try and also blow up the screen a little bit. When I looked at the video from yesterday, it was a little hard to see. Things look kind of blurry. I don't know if that's a feature of just my screen or how it looked for you guys. Let me see if I can't make it look bigger. So hi again, and so let's try and do a slightly more normal introduction to the class now that I'm a little more here. So hi and welcome. My name's Katie, and I'm the teacher. I have a master's degree in sociology. I've been teaching for more than 20 years. I got my degree from Portland State University in Oregon. I lived in Oregon for 15 years. I grew up in Virginia. I graduated barely from Open High School, and then pretty soon after that met the man who has now been my husband for 30 years. And we were looking for someplace new to move, and we got the Places Rated Almanac, which was a book at the time where you could read about cities all over the country, and we picked Oregon and got in my car and moved there. I started at Portland Community College and took psychology, and in my senior year of college I took sociology. And during my first class, the skies parted and the sun shone through and the angels sang, and I knew I had found a way to look at the world that I absolutely that resonated with me completely, and it continues to do so. My husband and I moved to New York City right after 9/11. I spent 3.5 years at the medical examiner's office there working on the identification project of the remains from the Twin Towers coming down. There were over 20,000 human remains brought to the medical examiner's office from ground zero, and we attempted to identify them all. We failed. But we identified quite a few. After the first few weeks, the majority of identifications were done via DNA, and it took 3.5 years to complete all of the testing. At that point, when that project finished, I moved to Virginia, back to Virginia and to Richmond, where I live now. My family's here. My husband and I bought a house in South Side. We lived near Forest Hill Park. And I was 40 at the time. I went to New York when I was 35 and came here when I was 40. I experienced a tremendous amount of depression and PTSD after leaving New York. And once I started to kind of get my feet under me, I continued to try and save the world. And my husband and I became foster parents. And I was 41 when we became foster parents, so we said we would take any age child, expecting that we would get teenagers. And so, of course, our first foster child was a 3-month-old baby girl. Her name is Imogen, and we adopted her when she was 2, and she's now 8. She'll be 9 in July, and she's getting ready to go into the 3rd grade. She has a genetic disorder that's led to among other things, she has neuropathy, which is a nerve disorder where she has pain sensations in her feet. And so when she started 1st grade, she was having a lot of pain, and so I started homeschooling her, which I've done very badly for 2 years. And now she's ready to try regular school, so she's going to Westover Hills Elementary in September to give that a try. So I teach primarily at J. Sargent Reynolds. Excuse me. I teach there I'm adjunct, but I teach almost full-time during the fall and spring. And for some reason, every summer I teach SOC200 at John Tyler. And I also teach at South University at Short Pump. It's a for-profit college that is for people who, they have a nursing program there. Sociology is a requirement for apparently every nursing program on the planet. So I'm primarily working with veterans and people who are returning to the workforce who want to get a nursing degree. And South is one of the better for-profit colleges, but it's still a for-profit college and it's very expensive. But the students, you know, feel that it's worth the trade-off, but they pay a lot more than you do. So I have 4 dogs, and if anybody walks by the house, they'll start to bark, so hopefully they won't. And I'm married. My husband works at Fort Lee. He's a computer science person. My parents live nearby. They live in the museum district. They ran a bed and breakfast there for many years. My stepfather was a hospital administrator. He is now almost 90, although he looks 50. My mom has Parkinson's disease, which she's had for a number of years. My brother, I have an older brother who lives in Maryland, who's an entrepreneur, and we're very rich. So he's the Republican of the family, and he has all the money, and I'm the Democrat of the family, so I don't. My parents helped found the Richmond Montessori School here in Richmond, and I started there when I was 2 years old, which I think I put in the notes on the Harvard question. So I teach, and I try and teach my daughter, and I also write, and that's pretty much it. So I've been teaching online for a long time. I'm certified as a Quality Matters instructor, which is a training program for teaching online. I tend to, I find online classes are difficult for students, and I have a lot more students end up not passing online classes than in-person classes because it's just so much easier to drift from an online class. So I've started using lectures and kind of making the class more live, which works a lot better when I don't get pneumonia at the beginning of the term. And this term I'm kind of going to be working on a case study model where I'm taking different things going on in the world and tying the concepts to them, the concepts from the that we're going to be covering to the case studies, rather than just going through chapter by chapter. You will be reading the textbook, and there will be quizzes available in Blackboard if you want to take those quizzes. There are multiple choice quizzes that you can take for extra credit that come specifically from the text. The 3 exams that you'll take during the course of the class are primarily cover lecture. There obviously is material from the book, but you have to have listened to the lecture because that's where the exams come from. It won't work to have just read the book. The written assignments, which are half of your grade, are things that will be sprinkled throughout the lectures. There will be just short things to do, like if you've already done the Harvard question or your introduction, or different things. Like sometimes I'll ask you to watch a film and just write a summary of it to show me that you watched it. Sometimes we'll do things more intensive, but they're mainly just things to keep people engaged and thinking and trying to apply the sociological way of thinking. You'll notice that I use Google Docs instead of discussion boards. I find that with Google Docs we can actually see what everyone's saying, and it's a much more engaging way to read what everyone's saying, and for me it actually keeps people a lot more involved who want to be involved. If you don't want to be involved, that's okay, you still have to post, but for people who want to be involved, there's just a lot more, it's all in one place rather than kind of cut up into conversations. And students have said that they find it a lot more engaging once they get through the kind of irritating part of this is something new and I don't like it, and I want to do discussion board because that's familiar. So again, Google Docs don't require anything, any kind of account or special thing from you. They're available online. It's just a word processor that creates documents that can be shared by everyone. I create the document and I set it to be open and available. Some documents are not open and available, like the lecture notes. Those are not editable by you. You can view them, but you can't edit them. But the things that we, excuse me, the things that we'll be responding to are editable. I'm new. I'm not new to computers, but I'm new to the recording technology. So I've just been reading up on how to try. I'm going to try and get my face in the corner. And apparently I have to record my face and then, embed it into the video of the screen. So that'll probably come later as I get more strength back. So the notes that you'll find linked to in the missions, I'll go through the notes and as I'm talking, and there will be links inside the notes that will take you to the places where you post your responses, and also to links that go further in depth into things that I talked about in case you're interested. So they're for your just extra reading if you're curious. It is kind of weird to be watching the notes on the screen and then also you're supposed to be posting with links in the notes, and so I went ahead and created a space on the menu called written assignments, and this provides you shortcuts to all the documents where you'll be posting things. In the beginning of the last lecture, I told you about katiesullivan.com, which may have been a mistake, which is a shortcut to get to a calendar that I maintain where you can access the lecture notes and videos without having to go through Blackboard. You do not in any way have to use katiesullivan.com. Everything you need is in Blackboard under the missions link. Everything you need is there. So again, half your score will come from multiple choice exams that I'll post online. You'll take them online. The other half will come from these written assignments. Lectures, I will post them. They will be up for a week. My intention is to do lectures on like Tuesdays and Fridays, but since I'm not feeling well, I'm probably for right now just going to be doing a lecture every day rather than trying to do a 2 to 3 hour lecture twice a week, which is what it would end up being in our normal class session time because we're double time. So anyway, if you ever have any questions, you're always welcome to email me. If you text me, just tell me what class you're in and know that I suck at texting, and will sometimes forget. I just suck at texting. If you have an emergency and you just need to reach me right away, you can send an email to my personal email address. It's just katiesullivan@gmail.com. I'm on that email all the time. I'll add it to the top of the lecture notes. And if you just need to reach me, if something happens, you're in an accident or something, you need to reach me. My Don Tyler email, I have to go in and check, and I'll be doing that, once a day, but I won't be, on it all the time. So if you need to reach me, literally right that moment. And then ksullivan1@jtcc. For normal correspondence. So the first mission was to send the introductions, and so as people have been sending those in, I've been adding them to this document, which again I think is a much more friendly way to look at introductions than a discussion board. If you don't agree with me, I'm sorry if you miss discussion boards, but most people find that they like it. It's just the change can be annoying. But I find discussion boards, you know, post your post and then respond to 2 postings to be rather flat and emotionless, and just often are just busy work in an online class, and I've never seen a lot of really good discussions come from them. So I'm trying to do something different, and I find it just more engaging. So we're going to do it that way. Okay, so at this point, you should have sent me an introduction, which was part of mission 1. If you wanted to, there's a test site in Google Docs for you to post. You can see some people have tried Google Docs, and then you should have posted to the Harvard, you know, why aren't you at Harvard? And then we're starting lecture 1, video 2 begins here. All right, so we're going to talk about the ideal versus the real. I'm going to go ahead and finish that through this video, and then the next lecture, which I'll do tomorrow morning, will be the Stanford rape case, which is going to be our case study for the first part of the class. Okay, so hopefully that's clear. I'll also tomorrow try and put up the formal syllabus. But basically, you know, when I put a lecture up, I think I said that you should complete the work within a week. So if you're putting in, you know, if our class are meeting in person, we'd be spending 2.5 hours a week, and then double that, so 5 hours a week together. If you're spending 5 hours a week on the class, you're going to be current. And hold on, my daughter needs to talk to me. Yeah. Okay, in the drawer next to the, under the sink, the one that pops out, there's a cleaner. Okay, well, you'll have to wait till I'm done, honey, I'm sorry. Okay, so we're going to start with the ideal versus real. So this is a concept in sociology that, right, as I was saying before, so 5 hours a week, you should be good, right? Okay, so if you're just listening to the lecture and then, you know, spending time just reading the book. So while you're doing lecture 1, I would be reading chapter 1, okay, which will give you the introduction to sociology. All right, ideal versus real. So sociology studies society, and society I think of kind of like an organism, right? And it wants to perpetuate itself, right? Like human genes, they want to continue on. And it has a lot of different ways of doing that, and it does it pretty successfully, right? We've had society for a long, long time. And so in our society, there's a lot going on. We have a lot of rules and, you know, a lot of different components to society. But one of the things that we have in society, which is interesting and interesting to sociologists, is this idea of the ideal versus the real. And we all have, we have this in families, we have this, pretty much everywhere. And the ideal versus the real is that we have a kind of set of cultural stories that we tell ourselves through the media and through the education system and through books and in other ways about how things are in our society. And then we have how things really are in society. And often those things are not aligned, or they're not as nice in reality as they are in the presentation that we give in society. So one example of that is sorry, that justice is blind, right? Justice system in the United States. And we tend to be very proud of it. And we have a literal statue of justice where justice is blindfolded. The idea being that what matters if you get involved in the criminal justice system is whether you are innocent or guilty. And, it doesn't matter the color of your skin, your level of attractiveness, how much money you have. Those things don't matter. What matters is, whether or not you did what you've been accused of doing. And if you've been accused of doing something, that you will have a trial, and you have rights, including the right to an attorney. You have Miranda rights, which we can all recite, even if we've never been arrested. And you go to a jury, or you may have your trial in front of a judge, and that you'll be found guilty or innocent based on the facts, and then you will, be sentenced, and the sentence will be fair. So we all know, because we're not six, that this is not really how things work, and that the criminal justice system is a lot more complicated than this ideal. But one thing that you might not be aware of is some of the factual parts are just not accurate. So if you watch television or you watch the news, every felony conviction is the result of a jury. And, we're always seeing on television and on the news, the juror, reading back the finding, the foreman of the jury. And the truth is that over 97% of felony convictions are the result of a plea bargain. So less than 3% of felony convictions come from a trial. And plea bargaining, which you are probably aware, is where someone who's been accused of a crime is able to, let's say you're accused of, it's funny, I recorded this lecture this morning, and I had the mute button on, and I had this exact same problem, which I had trouble remembering the different levels of homicide. So here I am again. So you're accused of, bad homicide, and you're faced with, 25 years to life, and you may be able to plea bargain to manslaughter, and with a sentence of 7 to 10 years. And the benefit to the state is that they don't have the expense of a trial, and they're able to get, a certain amount of justice. And sometimes the family of the victim are involved in the plea bargain, and so the families get a sense of justice. And then for the person who's accused, they get the opportunity to have a lower consequence for their behavior. Right. So the problem is when people are not guilty, they may say they are guilty because the plea bargaining system can be extremely coercive. And there's an article here, if you're interested, about what are some of the reasons why people who are innocent would plead guilty. And there's a famous case in New York that Ken Burns, the documentary filmmaker, made a film about. The film was called The Central Park Five. And the Central Park Five, it was a story in New York City in the 1980s. There was a tremendous amount of crime and drug use, and the New York City that we see today with Toys R Us and all the chains and tourists wandering around was not there, and there was a lot of crime and there was a lot of tension. And this idea of the super predator was introduced during this time. And a super predator were these young, usually African American or other minority males who were just like defective units, and they were just preying on society. And Hillary Clinton was called to task recently and had to go back and explain her use of this term, super predator, during the 1980s, because it turned out that there really wasn't, that this wasn't really the case, that these things weren't really happening, that it was people's fear and racism and other things going on. But it was under these circumstances of, New York being very dangerous, and this idea of a super predator, and also this idea of something called wilding, which is where it was believed that teenagers would just go out and just raise holy hell and attack people and steal things and just be out of control. And so it was just this, terror for people that there would be these gangs of young minority men who would just, kill you, right? It was just terrifying. So under all these conditions, a young, white, affluent jogger was attacked and brutally raped and brutally beaten in Central Park. And 5 young men, teenagers, they were young teenagers, 14, 15, and 16. They were African American and Hispanic, and they were poor. They lived, they were not in gangs. They were not juvenile delinquents. They did not have records, but they were not wealthy. And they were brought in, and basically, they had been in Central Park that night, but they were not wilding. They were not doing anything. But they were brought in, and they were questioned by the police. And they were questioned for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. And in the end, they confessed to the crime. And they confessed to the crime even though they were innocent. And the actual person who committed the crime actually admitted his guilt years later. And the DNA that was found at the scene was his DNA. And he admitted that he had done it because he ran into one of these men in prison and felt bad. So the rapist felt bad that someone else was serving time for his crime. But what happened is that, during interrogation, it's legal to lie to people who are being interrogated. And so these young men were being told that, well, Kevin is saying this about you, and unless you say this about him, then, you know, we're going to bring you up on these charges, and, you know, you're going to be in jail for the rest of your life, or you're going to get the death penalty, you know, so you better tell us what happened. And so basically they kind of talked the young men into confessions and kind of told them what happened, basically, in order for them to confess. And even though, you know, once the dust cleared, they all recanted their confessions, you know, once you have someone on camera, you know, saying, I did it, it's very hard to make that go away. And they were all convicted, and they were sent to jail. You know, they were exonerated many years later. It's an amazing documentary. If you haven't seen it, I was lucky enough to see it in the theater when it first came out. But there are other reasons why people would plead guilty, and one of them is that, you know, people don't understand the implications of probation. So if you say, well, I'm going to give you 3 years probation if you plead guilty, it's like, oh, well, that's not so bad, and I can go home tonight, so I'll take the probation. And for many jurisdictions, probation and other parts of the criminal justice system are income generators, and you pay to be on probation, and you are required to, you know, go to certain classes, which you pay for, and do other things depending on the jurisdiction. And if you then fail on probation, you will often go to jail for a longer period of time than you would have if you hadn't agreed to the plea and been on probation in the first place. So plea bargaining is allows the system to function. It literally couldn't function without it, but it also can be problematic. And this idea that we have that everybody goes to trial is just so far from the truth that it can't even see the truth. And then the United States has the death penalty, and we're other than Japan, the only industrialized nation that has the death penalty. The death penalty is seen as a human rights issue for most industrialized nations, and many industrialized nations will not extradite prisoners to the United States who are facing the death penalty. But, you know, we continue to have it, but it's not applied evenly, which I'm sure you'll be surprised to hear. And how is it not applied evenly? Well, there are different factors that come into play, which shouldn't come into play, in terms of who is executed. And so the race of the perpetrator plays a role, and the race of the victim plays a role. So if you have a white victim, you're more likely to get the death penalty than if it's a minority victim. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, about the implications of minority or poor victims. And in general, when we talk about deviance, we'll learn that when wealthy people are victims of crimes, they're more likely to have a result, meaning they're more likely to be solved. So the death row is applied, but it's not applied evenly to the rich and to the poor, or to people based on the color of their skin or the color of the skin of the victim. So it's not that everything is even, and we're learning more and more about bias in just how people look. And, you know, some people just look guilty, and people who just look guilty just end up getting convicted more often and end up getting longer sentences. So, you know, it's almost like we need to not have the defendant present during the trial, because it influences the outcome. So The other, another part of the ideal versus real is about personal risk. So we're really bad, as you probably know, about assessing our personal risk. My 8-year-old is afraid of sharks, for example, in Richmond. She believes that sharks can be in the river and kill her. But you know, it's like how we're afraid of flying when really we should be afraid of driving down Midlothian Turnpike. We're afraid, people are afraid of like home invasion. They're afraid of kidnapping. There was a case yesterday where a stranger, came after a young girl in Walmart and tried to grab her away from her mother, and it was all over the news. And so we're afraid of you know, strangers coming and grabbing our kids, and taking them away and kidnapping them and molesting them. And we're afraid of carjackings and drive-by shootings and all these things that most people have a really, really low risk of having happen to them. And we literally teach children to be afraid of people they don't know, particularly men. We teach them to be afraid of strange men. Right? And, you know, the problem is with that is who hurts kids, right? Well, it's not, you know, the guy at Walmart is all over the news because it's the exception, right? It's everyone's worst nightmare. And usually the things that are on the news because they're rare, or sensational for some reason. Like it's you know, another pastor getting arrested is not usually on the news, but when the pastor has molested 10 boys, it is. But you never see, you know, just another uncle being arrested, or, you know, it's the kind of day-to-day how sexual abuse really plays out, which is more than 90% of sexual abuse is from people that the child knows. And in fact, the child is at most risk, the most dangerous person to a child is the mother's live-in boyfriend. It's not the father, you know, it's a man who's in the home and is not married to the mother. And it's, you know, the coaches and other people who have who have access to the child and who have an opportunity to develop a relationship with the child. Because sexual abuse doesn't usually just happen out of nowhere. It usually comes from a developed relationship, and developing that relationship requires access. The same is true about homicide. Most women who are killed know the person who killed them, and almost 2/3 of rape victims know their attacker. So we tend to be familiar with the people who harm us, and yet we have this cultural story about strangers. You know, my parents are wealthy and live in an expensive house by the Virginia Museum and have an elaborate alarm system, and you know, worry about home invasion, which is, you know, home invasions where strangers are coming to your home with the intent of killing you are extremely rare. And we had one in Richmond like 10 years ago with the Harvey family, and another family was killed by the same people. And it really is like a once in a generation event in a city the size of Richmond. And you know, most homicides are poor on poor, and are, you know, people who know each other. So I'm actually, because of the neighborhood I live in, I'm at much higher risk of somebody breaking into my house than my parents, because most criminals and most crime victims tend to be in a lower socioeconomic class, and my neighborhood is in a lower socioeconomic area. So, all right, the last thing in this ideal versus real is social mobility. And so part of the story that we have in the United States is the, movement that, people move, that anyone can become wealthy. And, we look at people like Bill Gates and, other people and how they just become fantastically rich. And this idea of social mobility is a big part of our story. And this is a chart that actually looks at social mobility in the United States. And these charts are kind of confusing to read, so let me try and orient you. This part over here shows you the stacks, the columns are the parents' family income. Okay, so this is the household income that you're born into. So this stack right here is the people born in the lowest 20%. Okay, so if you took all the family incomes and split them into quintiles, which is 20%, lowest 20%, highest 20%, and then within the columns are where these people end up. So in the lowest 20%, 43% of the people born there end up there as adults. 27% of the people born into the lowest 20% end up here, so they make it up one step. 17% make it up 2 steps. 9% make it up 3 steps, and 4% make it up to the top. Okay. And then if you look at the top quintile column, it's really almost a perfect flip. So the 40% of people born into the top quintile stay there, 23% drop down 1, 19% drop down 2, 10% drop down 3, and 8% of people born in the top 20% end up in the bottom 20%. So it's hard to get rich when you're born poor, and it's hard to get poor when you're born rich. So this idea that, hard work, if you work hard, you'll get ahead. There are a lot of people who work hard and don't get ahead, and there are a lot of people who get ahead and they're not working hard. So income mobility is not exclusively about how hard you work. The best predictor, in fact, if I want to know about where your income as an adult, I would ask you things like, what is your parents' income, or what is your mother's level of education? Those are better predictors than your SAT scores or how lazy or motivated you are. So, ideal versus real. I'm going to stop there and go hack, and I will record the next part tomorrow. Okay? Bye.